You're listening to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast, your podcast for escaping life's monotony, indulging in your wildest travel fantasies, and discovering the constant beauty of this ever-changing world.
On today's episode, Fernando Diez joins us to give us a journey through the Galapagos Islands.
Welcome to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. We are your navigators, Allison
And Regan, and welcome to another Travel Tuesday of the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. We're really excited for you to be here for another journey with us today. We have been loving season 3 so far. It's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of great guests, a lot of really cool new destinations to talk about, and today is not going to be an exception. It is going to be another amazing destination, but I'll hold you in suspense for a moment longer while Allie gives a quick plug for our social media.
Yeah, the best place to find us is on Instagram, and that is Wanderlusting Wives. We're also on Twitter. It's at Wanderlust Wives, and then Facebook is Wanderlusting Wives Podcast. Also, we have a Gmail if you're wanting to email us. That is wanderlustingwives@gmail.com. We would love to hear from all of you and connect with you on social media. So let's get into the exciting part of the episode. We have Fernando Diez here with us, who's going to share all about the Galapagos Islands. So welcome, Fernando.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are so excited to have you on, and we cannot wait to hear about the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah,
Perfect.
It's going to be a good time. Yeah, so I would love to get started with just like a little bit about you and kind of like your background of how you got to be so well acquainted with the Galapagos Islands.
Great. Yeah. So this is, the company I work for, Quasar Expeditions, is a family-owned company. It was actually started by my parents in 1986. We are the second generation working in this business. And when I say we, my two brothers and I. So it's 3 boys and all of us are working at Quasar. Always, we always had an option as to what we wanted to do in life. But growing up, near the Galapagos, seeing what our parents were doing, we started off our own ways right after college, but sort of like naturally gravitated back to Quasar, and here we are. But for me, I've basically raised by the turtles and the tortoises and the penguins of the Galapagos. But it all dates back to like it was in 1969. My mother was just 16, and she convinced a biology professor had told them about this magical place called Galapagos in her country, and she somehow convinced her parents to let her venture into Galapagos as a 16-year-old with a group of friends, all girls, and they went to the Galapagos for, I believe it was about 15 days to explore. And back then, the Galapagos National Park hadn't been established. There were no guides, no trails, so they went aboard this Navy boat, and she saw Galapagos as wild as probably Charles Darwin saw it when he first visited the islands, centuries ago. And that captured her mind, and she spent the rest of her, young adult life trying to figure out how to make the Galapagos a permanent part of her life. So then she met my father, who was a natural entrepreneur. She took him to Galapagos, and he said, this is it. He was a car distributor in Ecuador, but he's like, forget that. And that's how the journey began. So we were kind of like born into this travel company that was just starting. It's the second oldest company in Galapagos, so there was like very little infrastructure back then. There wasn't even electricity yet. They were crazy enough to say, we're going to put some yachts there, and that's it. So impossible not to love the Galapagos. So I'm here to tell you all about this wonderful place.
It already sounds so wonderful, and we've barely gotten into the nitty-gritty of it. But before we jump into all the specifics of the Galapagos, do you want to share a little bit about your family's business and like where we can find more information about it, kind of what it's all about?
Yep. So the company name is Quasar Expeditions. You can find us online, Quasar EX for expeditions.com, and the social media handles for Instagram, it's at Quasar EX, Facebook, it's at Quasar Expeditions, Twitter, Quasar EX. So you can find us there. Also, if you look for us, we do a lot of YouTube videos. The Galapagos, and travel in general is so visual that I highly recommend you spend some time streaming in our YouTube channel. It's a wonderful place to see all the videos and all the wonderful stuff in the islands.
Yeah. Man, I want to go so badly, especially after going on the website too. I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this looks incredible." And I hardly know where to start with this conversation because I feel like it's almost a mystical destination that I mean, it's like I group it in a little bit with Antarctica, where it's like very well preserved, or at least people are trying to preserve it and everything. So what is like I know that the companies like charters cruises or whatever out there, but what is the safe and nature conscious way to visit the Galapagos?
Great question. Well, I just want to answer the first thing, and I'm so glad you brought Antarctica into the picture. The ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau said that Galapagos and Antarctica are the last two wildlife sanctuaries left in the world. And so
Oh wow.
it is, there's this primitive sort of sense about nature in Galapagos and in Antarctica that exists in few other places where the wildlife approaches you. They're completely unafraid of you. They're curious about you. And many people actually say that, wildlife in Galapagos is different. It's so different from anywhere else in the world. But when you think about it, it's actually how probably wildlife once was everywhere in the world before humans started invading their habitat, hunting animals, kicking off their habitat, to build cities and things like that. So they became naturally afraid of humans. But in Galapagos, that does not exist. Like there are trails marked by the Galapagos National Park, and there are birds nesting on the trail, and you literally have to step over them. They won't even move from their nests, and they'll just look at you as you walk over them. They just don't care. They don't care about your presence. Humans never harmed them. There was a time when Galapagos was like a stopping point for pirates and buccaneers, and they did, decimate the population of the giant tortoises in some of the islands. But other than that, they've been very, very well preserved. So the best way to see Galapagos is on a cruise, and that's probably also the most sustainable and eco-friendly way. So the thing about the Galapagos, it's an archipelago of 13 major islands and over 100 islets. So the only way to really see the best of Galapagos from north to south to east to west is to go on a cruise. There are, inhabited areas in Galapagos. It's only, which is actually 3% of the Galapagos of all the archipelago is inhabited, and 97% is part of the Galapagos National Park. So if you do stay in one of these inhabited areas, like in a hotel, you're only able to travel to the nearby visitor sites, on a 1 or 2 hour boat ride. And to really be able to see the best of Galapagos, you have to take a cruise where you're actually navigating at night to the islands that are far from each other, and you wake up at a different island each day. So that's the best way. It's the most eco-friendly way as well, in the sense if you're traveling on a small yacht, because it's a small footprint, only a handful of like-minded guests. It's non-invasive, and of course you have these very strict um, guidelines or rules from the Galapagos National Park that say what island you have to be in at a specific time of the day, when you have to disembark, when you have to leave the island, so that the next boat that's coming, you don't overcrowd the visitor site. So it's very well managed, for um, being a national park from a third world country. We are very proud of the Galapagos National Park, and it's actually a role model for many national parks in South America, where they actually send their people to get trained in Galapagos on the current care and preservation of wildlife areas.
Mm, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I wish that was the mindset of more. And like you're saying, at one point it probably was. And with the evolution of humans, it's become different in a lot of different places. So it's incredible that there is such a kind of majesty and reverence about it a little bit. That's really cool. My question here, like when you go on a cruise like this, is there special equipment that you need to bring or that they provide so that like you leave less of a footprint if possible?
In terms of like the equipment needed for like the expedition, for the activities, it's all provided, at least on our cruises. It's provided and it's free of cost. So snorkeling masks, the snorkels, the fins, the wetsuits that are needed for the snorkeling. We provide all that. The kayaks, the paddle boards, we provide all that, and that's included as part of your trip. Um, we there In terms of activities, there are also walks and hikes. You don't need anything but shorts, a t-shirt, and some like hiking shoes or something like that. And then the other activity is just the zodiac rides, and these zodiacs are they're part of the expedition. They're on board the ships. And then when it comes to like bringing your own stuff, there's actually some restrictions. Like you're not supposed to bring your own shampoo and conditioner. There are biodegradable special amenities provided on board the ships. Um, we have to abide by these strict rules about the amount of plastic that we can produce. So a lot of things that normally come packaged are like single-use plastics, for example, just don't exist in our operation, many other operations. So we do provide a very extensive sort of like packing list and things of what you need to bring, what you can't bring, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's provided. But in general, it's like most wildlife areas. You have to take um, great. You got to pack right for the destination and just take the right things, and then all the stuff that's needed for the enjoyment of the expedition itself, we provide all that at no cost.
That's amazing. I love that not only is the Galapagos Islands just an incredible place to visit, but the fact that you can't even use like your own shampoo. That's just thinking of every single possible thing to make sure that we can preserve this incredible national park. And that kind of leads me into the question of how many of these experiences are actually on the islands because you don't really want to go and disturb the wildlife there, and how much more of it is just going on the zodiacs or the kayaks.
Yep. So it all depends on the visitor site. So let me give you just tell you a little bit about how the national park works. So the Galapagos National Park gives out these permits to all cruise companies that operate in the Galapagos. And these permits um, give you a 15-day itinerary, which different cruise companies can split it up however they want. Quasar splits it up into 2 week-long itineraries, or you can do two back-to-back itineraries and do a full 15-day trip. Other companies, to save on costs and be able to provide less expensive trips, they break it down into like 3, 4, and 5 night trips, which is perfectly fine and allowed by the Galapagos National Park, because essentially what you're doing is you're not able to visit the same visitor site but every 15 days. And however you break it up, you'll never be in the same visitor site till 2 weeks later. Um, However, I highly encourage anybody who's looking at visiting the Galapagos to stay there at least for a week. Quasar, we've been offering week-long cruises since 1986, and it was out of a coincidence. It started as a week-long cruise because there was only one flight out to the islands every week, so it had to be one week. We drop you off one week, and then the plane comes back the next week. But it just so happened that it was the perfect amount of time to see a lot of what Galapagos can offer. If you are one of those time privileged people and that have the budget, then by all means do the 15-day trip. You will not get bored. You will not see the same animals. Every animal is so different. And the more time you spend in Galapagos, the better chances you have of these like peak unexpected wildlife encounters that happen all the time. They can happen whether you're sometimes, we're having breakfast and the captain says orcas, and everybody leaves their breakfast as is, and they get on the zodiacs, and you go chase orcas that are feeding on mobula, or they're feeding on sunfish, and you get to watch this amazing feeding frenzy, from up close. And then you're back, and our staff is there. They've warmed up to breakfast again, and you get to have breakfast. Like, the expedition comes first, and always, these in- random encounters, they'll happen at the most random times of the day. You just have to be ready for them. So that's another reason why the small ship experience is so much better, because when you're in like one of the large ships, for example, the 100 passenger ships, you can't tell 100 people to leave their breakfast and get on the zodiacs. By the time you're able to get them off, the orcas are gone. But on our ships, where we only have two zodiacs per ship, getting everybody off the ship in a matter of like 5 minutes, everybody can be out and chasing dolphins, chasing orcas. So that's another reason why to travel in small groups.
Man, oh man, I am busy writing down notes here and I have like 17 questions already. And I'm so excited to get into the conversation on wildlife. But I do want to kind of like wrap up this last kind of conversation about the specifics, the logistics of the trips too. And like, is this trip kind of recommended for a specific age group, or is it kind of anybody would do well?
Yep. We like to, at least for Quasar, it's from 5 to 95. And we've had family charters where, the grandparents charter the ship, and they bring, their kids and their grandkids, and it's like 32 people filling the ship. And you have some that learned how to swim yesterday and some that, were born 90 some years ago. And the great thing about Galapagos, it's a soft adventure where you can make it as active or as passive as you want. You can snorkel for 2 hours if you want, or you can snorkel for 20 minutes. If you're not up for it, or if you don't feel like being in the water for so long. So there are a few destinations in the world where you know people of all ages can have the same amount of fun doing the exact same thing. So it's not like Disney World where go to the teacups, and then the older kids need to do the roller coasters, and then the adults, it's a nightmare for them altogether.
Yeah.
Right? In Galapagos, regardless of your age, you'll have a fantastic time. And kids, all that we require is that they can swim. We provide these special life vests for kids to just feel very comfortable in the water floating with the wetsuit and the life vest. And as long as they can swim and look with a mask underwater, they'll have an amazing time. And the rest of the activities, walks and hikes and the kayaking, they just require, the company of an adult. Um, and everybody has just an incredible amount of fun.
I'm telling my mom about this. Take everybody.
Well, any other questions before we jump into the wildlife?
I did just want to ask too,
Okay.
what's the weather like? Like and is it pretty temperate year round? Is there a specific time of year that's better?
Yep, that's a great question. The wonderful thing about the Galapagos is because they're right on the equator, there are no seasons. You don't have the four seasons that you have in the extremes of the Earth. It's just the sunny season and the less sunny season, and they're still really sunny. Um, but I would say, so in terms of like water temperatures and air temperatures, you'll have an amazing time. We haven't had anybody come back from traveling at any time of year saying they wish they would have gone at a time where it was warmer or it was not as hot, or it's just perfect weather year round. But there is a time of year which we call the secret season, which coincides with the return back to school in North America. So North America is the main market for the Galapagos. But so right after, when school starts, that's September, October, and November, probably the 3 months when North America has traveled the least. In November, they do travel, but it's, for probably Thanksgiving, and it's internal in the United States. But to a place like Galapagos, because it's the main market, it's quieter than in other times of the year. And the wonderful thing about this time of year is that you can, one, take advantage of less crowds in the national park. Two, take advantage of discounts that have nothing to do with seasonality or because you won't see certain species. It's just because there's less demand because the North American market is not traveling at that time. So if you have that flexibility, that is the time of year that I recommend. And of course, for families, you have to go when the kids are on vacation, and that time of year is definitely, June, July, and August. The summer is the best time to go.
Yeah, it makes me wish I wasn't a teacher so I could go when everyone else was not there, but that's okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh,
So
man.
I'm excited about the wildlife. I mean, everything else has been super exciting, but the wildlife especially, I am so excited to hear about. So I guess the biggest question is a lot of the species there, are they native to the Galapagos or have they come from like all over the world? What can you kind of expect from the wildlife in the Galapagos?
Yeah, so the Galapagos are a volcanic hotspot. So they were born out of the ocean. So there was nothing there. Every animal that you see either floated in or flew, So that's why most of the animals, their largest variety is birds because they can easily get to the Galapagos. But then you have other species that floated there on logs. And so I always like to bring the example, to me, the most interesting one is you're familiar with like the green iguanas that you see like in Mexico or in the coast of Ecuador, those. So those are the relatives of the Galapagos marine iguana. And maybe, there was a flood and they ended up on a log and they drifted out on a river and then out into the ocean. And all of a sudden they ended in the Galapagos. And what happens in the Galapagos, because these islands are volcanic and pretty arid, um, there was no food. They didn't have any plants or fruits to eat, so they started eating whatever was close to the edge of the ocean, and that was the seaweed. And as they got better and better at eating the seaweed, they started to swim. And as they started to swim, when the seaweed near the shore was dry, they would have to dive to eat on the algae. So this is an iguana that learned how to dive and swim like a fish. Its claws turned into, these razor sharp things to cling on the rocks underwater to breathe. They're the ones that were darker in color because reptiles are cold blooded. They survive better because the water is cold, so they would get cold more quickly, but they would warm up more quickly because of their dark color. So the iguanas from green transitioned to black, and now they're pitch black. They need that because today they spend about an hour. They can spend about an hour feeding underwater, diving, to the point that they've gotten so good at it that their heart basically stops. They've been feeding for so long underwater that they can make their heart stop, eat the algae, and then they come up. Obviously, their blood and their whole body is cold, so they just lay in the sun for hours and hours. And because they've eaten salt, they learn how to spit the salt through their nostrils, and you see them spitting salt. And that's all evolution from the normal iguana that you just see on trees. And so that is just one example of the species that ended up in Galapagos, and all of a sudden, they evolved into these very different species. And the same thing with like the tortoises, they had no predators. So probably one of these, you know, small tortoises that lived in the continent floated to the Galapagos, no predators, an abundance of food. And they grew to these gigantic beasts that can weigh up to, 1,200 pounds. And that's why I said, that the pirates and the whalers almost decimated the population of tortoises in certain islands, because for them, they came to the Galapagos, they would board, take them on the ships, and one of these tortoises can survive for a year without food or water aboard a ship. So it was, for them, it was having the ability to have fresh meat to feed the whole crew without needing to do anything to these tortoises. So they were kind of like, it was like the crown jewel of the anything that you can bring on board to feed your crew. And so of course, the word got out, and a lot of people would come in, and they would, take the tortoises and put them on the ships, and to the point that some species actually became extinct. And the only way we know this is because the shells of the tortoises, they're different in the different islands depending on the food. The ones that had food close to the ground, they have a dome-shaped shell, and the ones that had it up on the ground, the shell at the has like an indentation towards the top to let them, stretch their necks, and that's how they knew from which island they came. And so when they saw the carcasses, um, that's how they realized, that some of the species were extinct. So again, that's another species, and I could go on forever and tell you a million. There's a finch that learned how to feed on blood of other birds by, it picks out their feathers and it drinks the blood, because that was the only way to get, there was no water in the islands. And so all these animals have just changed their habits to survive in Galapagos, and you have these species that are just extraordinary. And when you go from one island to the other, you see these same species that have adapted to each island, and you really see evolution at work. So, I'm Catholic, but I go to Galapagos, and it's undeniable proof that evolution is a thing, that it exists, and that it's real is just incredible.
Yeah, my gosh, no wonder we learn about it in every textbook ever. Like in science class growing up, several times we're learning about it and like that's incredible. I am so blown away by animals and their adaptability and everything through evolution. I My mind is blown right now. And yes, please continue to talk about animals for the rest of time. Like I am just fascinated. And that was actually one of my questions is how do the species differ from island to island? And is it super obvious that they're all connected, or are there some kind of like mysteries of how they got to be there?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's actually Darwin was one of the first to notice this. They in his expedition they collected the Darwin's finches, and it's like the same bird. So one finch flew to Galapagos, and it reproduced, and because it could fly, it flew to different islands. And on some islands, it had really hard seeds that it had to crack open with its beak. In other islands, it had trees that had worms, so it needed a slightly longer beak. So they started to adapt to the island that they were living in, and so the same bird evolved in different islands with totally different beaks, completely different beaks. And there's actually this couple who today is studying finches from Stanford University, and they've actually determined that finches can grow adaptations from one generation to the next. So if the parents started, the beak was slightly thinner because it was better for eating, the offspring would have that adaptation. So it's they're evolving faster than most animals would in the Galapagos. So the finches is one example. The marine iguanas is also another example. In some islands they have a lot more food because there's a stronger presence of the Humboldt current, so the sea algae is thicker, and so they're bigger. They turn different colors when they mate. They turn, can you imagine like a black iguana that turns, they call them the Christmas iguanas, it turns um, green and red when it's in mating season. And you see all this, but that doesn't happen in all the islands. So for some reason, in certain islands, they needed this change in colors to be able to attract females, and it's a mystery as to why it happens in some islands and when in others. But again, you see this with lots of the animals. Now, with most of the other birds, they're relatively the same because they are easily able to fly. The finch, because it's such a small bird, it probably stays in one island for its entire life. But the blue-footed boobies and the red-footed boobies and the masked boobies, they can fly from one island to the next. So they're relatively the same in all islands. Sea lions are also a little bit different based on the different islands. But in general, you do see from one island to the next a slight difference in most of the species. And just consider that, the eastern islands in Galapagos, like the easternmost, San Cristobal, is 4 million years old. And Fernandina on the Western Islands, the last volcanic eruption was only about 5 years ago. So it's technically a baby island. So you can imagine what 4 million years of evolution does to these animals. And it's fascinating. And so, again, that's another reason why you need to take the 7-day cruise or the 14-day cruise, because to be able to see evolution at work, you have to travel to these islands that are in the extremes of the archipelago. Most of the shorter itineraries just stick to the central islands, and you won't see this visible change in the species that you see when you actually venture into the extremes of the Galapagos.
I do actually just have one follow-up question on that too, so that we have a frame of reference. Approximately like how big is the Galapagos in total so that we know like how far away these islands are where there's these evolutionary differences in animals?
So you got me there. That's a great question on the exact distance. I can tell you in travel time. Like, so for example, Genovesa or Tower Island, that is the northernmost island that we visit on the naturalist cruises. There, Wolf and Darwin Island are further north, but they are a sanctuary for hammerheads and whale sharks. And you can't disembark in those islands. So they're exclusive for dive cruises only. And if there are any divers listening, I probably don't have to tell them this, but the Galapagos is like always at the top of every diver's list for probably the best place to see hammerheads. I've seen schools of about 500 hammerheads in the Galapagos
Oh my gosh.
while diving, and you see whale sharks, and it's just incredible. But anyway, so Tower Island is about an 8-hour navigation from the central island, from the place where you would board at the airport. So you can imagine why, if you stay on one of these hotels, you can't do an 8-hour day trip, right? So you need a
Mhm.
boat to get there. And then from Tower to like Fernandina Island, which is the westernmost island, it's about a 10-hour navigation. So all in all, these are pretty long navigations, and that's the wonderful thing about a cruise is that you actually when you're actually doing these 7-night trips, most of the navigations are happening while you sleep. So you have dinner, they pick up the anchor, and you wake up when the anchor drops, like maybe at 5 a.m., and you landed in the next visitor site. So you wake up at a different place each night. Sometimes I have to admit, we do get, people saying, "Oh, I wish we weren't navigating at night so we could sleep, without the yacht engine noise." But it's a very, very small price to pay for the wonderful things you see each day and the
Mhm.
differences of all the islands.
Yeah,
Mm.
the burning question that I have is, now growing up around the Galapagos and your family business, have you been able to see evolution firsthand, like with some of these species in your own experiences?
So the what I've been able to see in terms of evolution over I'm 40 and that I can remember is essentially like with the finches. None of the animals, of the other animals, have really changed enough. Like 40 years in a span of like evolution is nothing. You won't see a change in anything. But the finches, after this study, from this couple that I mentioned, and they have everything is on display at the Charles Darwin Station, and I've read their books, and it's evident that in a generation, in 10 years, you can actually a generation for these finches, you can actually see the changes from one generation to the next. So it's this adaptation that is really noticeable. And of course, when you take a trip and you see one island, in 10 hours you see evolution at work, uh, with the same species, in an island that is hundreds of miles away.
Ah,
That's
man,
really
that is
cool.
so cool. I know. I'm just like geeking out right now with my like animal lover self. It's just like this sounds incredible. So I guess I have a couple of other things I want to get to in this episode, but I have to ask if you have favorite animals. And that might be a tough question to pick just one. So maybe a favorite mammal, maybe a favorite reptile, and a favorite bird or whatever else, like top 3 maybe.
That's fair. All right. So the favorite mammal is the sea lion, and because I don't know if you've ever snorkeled in sea lions, and you can snorkel with sea lions like in California and things like that, but it's a relative of the California sea lion, so they're very similar in the way they look, um, and they're just so playful, so
Hmm.
unaggressive. You're snorkeling and they'll come and blow bubbles in your mask, and then just like twirl around and just swim away. Um, the pups, when you're in the beach, they'll approach you, and you can't touch the animals in Galapagos. If it was allowed, you could pick up a booby in one arm and a sea lion in the other and a turtle in the other and just take them home. Uh, but it's not allowed. So they approach you and you have to like step back, and then they'll just like lay on your beach towel, and you got to wait for them to get up. So these are very like inoffensive. They're like little golden retrievers in their, if I have a golden retriever, and like their body language is very similar to like golden retrievers, and they're so good with whether it's like with kids or adults. You do have the males that are territorial and they bark. That's how they tell you you're in their territory. And when that happens, you just walk away. But the females and the pups are incredible. So that's my favorite mammal because you can interact with them for sure. When it comes to the birds, I'd have to say it's the blue-footed boobies. because they're just, when you see them dance, is just so weird looking, and the dance is so awkward, like moving their blue feet up and down. And blue is a very, very rare color in animals. So having these birds with these bright blue feet that are also like really curious. So that would be my favorite bird. Reptile, definitely the marine iguana, for the reasons that I explained. They're just so cool. It's like Godzilla's children all over the place, and you can snorkel with them. You see them in all the walks and the hikes, and in the water, it has to be the whale shark. Now, the whale shark you probably won't see on a naturalist cruise with Quasar. You really only see them diving, but to see a whale shark underwater is, it's like a submarine, the size of a submarine, and they just pass by it they look very slow, but you're kicking your fins as fast as you can to barely be able to catch up to them and see them, and they're huge. They're huge animals. Um, so yeah, that's my top four.
Yeah, man, I could literally sit here and listen to you talk about animals forever, but I know we're getting a little towards the end. So I'm interested, like, what does a week look like? Like, I know if you're going on this expedition, say it's for a week, you're going to a new island every day, but like, what are the highlights that you would say? Is there a specific island that's incredible, or a certain activity or anything like that?
Yep. So that's a great question. We just had these videographers that we sent to Galapagos. They were going to do 360 for like a VR Galapagos session, and I'll be happy if you guys have a VR headset. Just send me a message. I'll send you the actual file
Oh,
to see what a Galapagos experience. We want to do this because it's hard. We're talking about this right now, but let's say, like at a trade show, how can I say what we've been talking about like in 40 minutes? How can I say that in 2 minutes to somebody? And that's why we are doing this virtual reality thing. Um, and they came back and they said, "Oh, Fernando, I didn't know it's going to be so active." And I'm like, "Yes, Galapagos is." Jackie Gifford, the editor of Travel and Leisure, who we sent, she's like, it was like the best boot camp she's ever been to because, you know, you wake up like it's 6:30, 6:45. The thing is, the wildlife in Galapagos is really, really active in the morning. The birds are going out to feed. Most of the birds are not nocturnal feeders, so as soon as there's daylight, they go out to feed. So seeing these feeding frenzies, that happens early in the morning. Plus, the day gets a little bit hotter, and birds, all that they can do to cool themselves is either be in the water or just, they blow air through their sacs. And so they need to be active when it's a little bit cooler, which is in the early hours. So you wake up early, but then the cool thing is, you're up early, then you do some snorkeling, you come back, have lunch, you have time for siesta. The only times of the year when I have siesta is when I go to Galapagos. It's necessary and it's like the best thing ever. So you have lunch, you have about an hour while the day is, it's hotter during the day. These are volcanic islands, so they can get pretty hot. Then after the siesta, you go out like on a walk or a hike, and then do kayaking. And so you come back and you have your nightly briefing about what's going to happen, the next day. And it's a long day. And we joke about this, but the bar bill on our cruises, they stink. We don't make any money off the liquor because people are exhausted. They need to recharge and get ready, for the expedition the next day. And it's an expedition. It's an adventure. It requires for you to get up early. When people are not morning people, on these cruises, you normally see their faces like the first day is like, oh my God, is it going to be 6 days of this? And by the second or third day, they're the first in the dinghies. Like you don't want to miss anything. So I do want to point that out that these are active trips, but of course, you get plenty of sleep at night. You get that siesta time. There's great food on board, and what a difference with Quasar with other companies is that we really focus on the local food. You can have fine French food anywhere in the world, but you want to try the local ingredients. Ecuador has over 90 varieties of potatoes, and we don't give you all 90 varieties during the cruise, but we make you try potatoes that are, purple, green, yellow, that have different textures, and you get to try these flavors that are just fantastic. So, we focus a lot on the food as well as part of a culinary journey through the region and through the country. So your typical week involves at least, two activities in the morning and two in the afternoon. They can vary between, the snorkeling, kayaking, paddle boarding, or the zodiac rides, and of course the walks and the hikes. And the activities are predetermined by the Galapagos National Park. So when you book an itinerary or a trip in Galapagos, you'll know exactly what to expect each day. So you really know exactly how to pack. Some landings are wet landings, so you disembark right on a beach into the water, not getting fully wet, but like knee high, for example. You dry your feet, put your shoes on, and you start hiking. And then some visitor sites are dry landings where you can have regular shoes and disembark. And as I said, the uh, we've had 90-year-olds doing every single activity. Just it's a matter of how active you are and how active you want to be, but you don't have to be in great shape to visit the Galapagos. Kids don't have, they're not going to be hiking 5 hours a day. These are normally 1 to 2 hour soft hikes with so much to see along the way. It's like a slow pace. And for me, the favorite activity is the snorkeling. We try some cruise companies only do one snorkeling a day, because for women, getting your hair wet and drying it and wet and like 2 or 3 times a day might be a pain. But our guests, all they want to do, if they could snorkel 4 times a day, that's what they would do. And so we just provide as many opportunities as possible for the snorkeling, and we give you these great wetsuits. For the waters can be a little bit colder in one part of the cruise and then warmer in another part, but you'll always be comfortable with your mask, your snorkel, your fins, and your wetsuit, and just have an amazing time in the water. So that's a summary of kind of like what a week looks like, packed with adventure. But when people leave, they have literally like thousands of photos. And because I said you could literally pick up the animals, you don't need a telephoto professional lens to get a close up, a close up, of all the animals. A good iPhone, one of the newer ones with the new lenses, they can take amazing photos that look completely professional, because the wildlife won't move. They'll actually pose for you.
Ugh,
That's my kind
I'm
of trip.
giddy with excitement. Yeah, this is just awesome.
That's
Oh,
incredible.
man. Yeah. This is incredible. I am so, so excited that we got to talk to you about this. It just sounds amazing. And Allie, do you have any final questions? I know we're going to wrap up here in a sec, but do you have anything else?
I don't, other than our travel blitz questions we gotta hammer him
Oh,
with.
shoot. Yeah, we didn't tell you about this part.
Surprise!
So for our episodes, we do a section at the end that's called our travel blitz. And essentially what it is that we're going to fire off some travel related questions. And it's literally just like rapid fire. Like we'll say it and you say what comes to your mind. There doesn't have to be like an explanation or anything, even though we might really want to ask for an explanation, but it's just like rapid fire answers. So,
All right.
I guess we'll wrap up our conversation on the Galapagos here. But thank you so much for sharing everything, and we'll get right into our travel blitz segment.
Number one is, what is your number one travel tip or hack? It doesn't have to be Galapagos related, just be travel in general.
Pack lightly.
That's a great one.
Ellie likes that one.
I do.
All right, your top 3 favorite destinations that you have been to.
Antarctica, Puglia in Italy, and Alaska. And of course Galapagos, but
yeah.
Honorable mention.
Yeah.
Or just a given.
How about top 3 destinations you want to go to?
Mozambique, Yukon Territory, and Botswana.
Good choices too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. Next question. What is the strangest thing you've eaten while traveling?
I would have to say crickets and millipedes in Myanmar.
That is
Ooh.
unique. All right, and then the last one, what's the top thing you can't travel without besides like, the essentials, toothbrush, toothpaste, those kinds of things? What's your thing you can't travel without?
My camera.
All great answers.
Yes. Well,
That was
Fernando,
fun.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that just gives our listeners just like a little snapshot of if they've kind of identified with some of the things you've said as a traveler, like their travel personality fits into what we've been talking about through the episode. It just gives a little snapshot of some other things that they can think about if they identify with it. So
Excellent.
thank you so much for coming on our podcast and chatting with us. I just know our listeners are going to love this. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, sharing my experiences about the Galapagos. The one thing, if I can just say one last thing, we at Quasar, we offer luxury cruises, so that these are high ticket items, but you can explore Galapagos. It depends on your budget. The only thing to keep in mind, if you can go for a week, go for a week, and always look at a Galapagos trip as an investment and not an expense, because as I like to say, the islands always put in a show for everybody. You just have to show up, right? So look at it as an investment. Put it on your bucket list. If it's not tomorrow, if it's not 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we have people who've waited 40 years to go, but go. Or, they're one of these places that are just worth visiting.
I love that. I'm ready to go.
Yep, packing the bags.
Yeah.
Well, on that incredible note, we will wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. Come escape with us again every other Tuesday for Travel Tuesdays.
Don't forget to give us a subscribe and a follow on all of our social media and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, wander on.